Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you about a very common but easily fixable mistake that I see a lot from my students. So what happens is that when they transition to the end game, they don't immediately make an adjustment to this new part of the game, and they continue playing the end game as if it was a middle game, primarily with regards to the role of the king. So people still castle as if king safety was the number one priority, when in reality, once the queens are off the board, you should start thinking more in terms of king activity and king productivity than you do about king safety, because the king is generally quite safe with the biggest attackers off the board. So this is an example from a game of a student of mine where he made a decision that I think many people could relate to, which is castling. Connecting the rooks, tucking the king away out of the center of the board. But a more experienced player would probably be attracted to a move like king e7, keeping the king in the center in the field of action, where he can also help the rooks in the fight for the open file. Right? Because the king is completely safe, the e-file is closed, there are no checks to the king. So why not keep the king more relevant? Of course, if you wanted to, you can also start with a move like rook d5. It doesn't hurt anything, it's a good square for the rook, and then you can simply follow up with king e7. Now, if you do castle, it does give white a chance to fight for the initiative with a move like b4, and then improving his king via the queen side, advancing his queen side pawns, and you're really going to feel that your king is missing from action. It's going to take a couple of moves just to put him back on e7 where he could have gone in the first place. That's really something I encourage you guys to start thinking about, that as you make that transition to the end game, you immediately start looking at your king and start thinking about how to make him useful rather than just how to hide him away. Right? And now I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples from Grandmaster games where the king was used in a really effective way. This is the game MVL versus Wei Yi from a rapid tournament in 2019. MVL has the advantage of the bishop pair. That's always a nice advantage to have in an open position with pawns on both sides of the board. The bishops tend to do better than a combo like the bishop and knight. So let's see how MVL exploits this advantage. He goes bishop e4, b6, only way to protect the pawn, and bishop c6. So now black has to make a big choice where to put this knight. It seems like both of these squares are possible. It doesn't seem like there's a big difference. Actually, c7, I would say at first glance, it looks pretty passive. Because if you're choosing a square, you'd like to be able to see the potential from it, right? Like, where can this knight go? Like, all these squares are taken by the white pawns, right? So why would that actually be superior to playing the knight to f6? Well, we're going to see. So he goes knight f6. A really big mistake here, guys, would be to take that knight. Like, you most certainly do not want to be giving up that powerful bishop for the knight. It doesn't matter that you're doubling your opponent's pawns. You're not going to have any way to use that in this newly emerged endgame, which is called bishops of opposite color. We can talk about that another time, but these endgames tend to be very drawish. So what does white do instead? He brings out the king. Where do you think this king is going? Normally, you would think he's going towards the center, right? Probably 90% of the time that would be true. But look what happens. Black also starts bringing out his king. You see, by the way, how safely he's tucked away on h8. Well, safe, but also doing nothing. And black is just going to have to spend more moves to get it back into the action. And now white surprises everyone by not going into the center. White goes this way. Wow, yeah, you don't see that kind of play on the flank with the king as often. But white has realized that there is actually a very nice invasion on these light squares that black is going to have a hard time stopping. By the way, I also want to point out how beautifully this bishop dominates the black knight, right? Notice how the black knight just has nowhere to go. So black continues on his way. White goes to a4. Very important is that you cannot use this pawn to keep the king out because it will get attacked by bishop b7 and be forced to move forward, allowing the king in anyway. So black just goes with his king, king b5, king d8. He's trying to get the king in time to protect his pawns, and king a6. Now, you cannot protect the pawn with the bishop because the king just goes all the way to b7. And I would just say, guys, that it's a very, I don't know, satisfying is the only way I can describe it, satisfying moment for white to take a king that was on b1, not really having a lot of power, and getting it up all the way to the 6th rank of the opponent, already starting to attack the opponent's pawns, maybe even the 7th rank. So black goes king c7, gaining a tempo on the bishop. We go bishop d5. Now, we're allowing them to capture us, but only for a specific reason, because in this situation, this pawn would be hanging as well as the a7 pawn. So black would be losing a pawn in this bishops of the same color endgame. And black preferred to give up the pawn on f7, because after all, white does have doubled f-pawns, right? So maybe it's not that painful to lose the f-pawn for black. But of course, the problem for black is that there's barely anything to do, anything to attack. White's plan of winning this position involves marching up the a-pawn to a5, breaking up black's pawn chain, weakening that pawn on c5, and eventually turning that into a target. And that is why black didn't see any point in sitting passively in the position. They played knight e4, giving up that pawn as well. And eventually white won the game using their f-pawn. Yeah, I can show you a couple of moves here, but the result was never really in doubt. The f-pawn is actually just too strong. And yeah, the bishops are doing a really good job of keeping out the black king here. You just want to go f6. And at this point, you can't trade bishops, right? Because the white e-pawn is going to promote. You definitely cannot be taking there. That pawn is heading towards queening, and here black resigned. So why did they resign? Well, they can still stop the pawn with this move, but we can take this one and simply have a new passed pawn to promote. So black can't really put up any resistance against this idea. Let's go to our next example. Here we got the game Anton Guijarro David versus Rasmus Svane from the European Championships in 2019. So the players have gone into an endgame quite quickly. And what to make of this unusual looking endgame, right? Not really your typical position. I think there's a lot of unusual features about the pawn structure. For example, the fact that black has captured back with on g6 with the f-pawn away from the center rather than towards the center, as is more common. That actually might have been a mistake, but I think he just wanted to open up this file for the rook as well as a path out for his king. White has a nice base advantage. White has a protected pass pawn on e5. That's obviously a very nice pawn to have. No obstacles in terms of pawns in its way. On the other hand, white's bishop looks quite poor in the sense that all of those pawns in the center are blocking him in, right? So who's better here, guys? It's a mystery, isn't it? Hard to make a determination because each side has their advantages. So let's see what's going to be the decisive factor. All right, white plays king g2. Where is this king going? Is it just going to go there to protect the pawn? Is that really it? Is it going to be trying to go back and into the center? Is it going up the board? We don't know yet, do we? But you can start thinking about that important question. So black played rook a8, a rook c1. Yeah, that's going to be a really important part of white's plans. You're going to see, because white will eventually play the move pawn to c4 right here. Yeah, really important move, trying to open up the files for the rooks. And in general, white wants to do something like capturing on d5. If black captures with the pawn, going rook to b5, and attacking the d pawn as well as helping the a pawn advance, putting pressure on black's bishop. That is the plan, and I guess that is what induced black to actually capture himself. But that capture strategically works out very well for white as well, because now the king has this incredible square in e4. I mean, again, such a lovely king, right? Going from g1, not doing much, right into the middle of the board. And, you know, the king is a great defender, guys. This is one of the very unusual ways of looking at the king that I learned from my coach. That he compared the king to glue, right? Because the king is one of the only two pieces that controls every single square around him. So why is that important? Because it lets you know that the king's actually a very good defender, right? He can just protect every single square around him, and you can see how he's able to protect that pawn, how he's able to protect that pawn, as well as like any piece that would be by him. So yeah, the king definitely can be used as an effective defender. But of course, on e4, he's just also very active. And that is going to play the decisive role in this game, guys, because black just doesn't have a king that can quite match ours. And of course, white does have to make more progress. You're going to see he's going to try doing stuff with the pawns. And yeah, this is a very nice move that allows white to trade off their doubled pawns, open up their bishop. King comes all the way there, and actually suddenly the e pawn is already making a big threat of a fork. Rook d5. King went back to protect d4, but now we are coming with the next pawn. And eventually we're going to be playing f5. But for now, we also broke in on the b file. That was quite nice. And here we go. And now again, our king comes back to that square. Look at the difference in the position of the kings, guys. So yeah, poor black king stepping away from the fork. Now all of white's pieces are just getting such enormous energy, right? The rook on the 7th, the king on the 5th, the bishop attacking the rook. And white didn't really have any problems winning this position. Despite the limited material, there's only 3 pawns for each side, but the white e pawn is actually really powerful. And now another important idea, activating their rook. And so they're threatening just to some kind of version of rook g8 and then pawn to e6 those are the next 2 moves, right? So rook g8 and pawn e6, take the rook, promote the d pawn. So black tries to defend like that, but then they wind up having problems with the h pawn. And again, now even with 2 pawns on the board, still the white king is just doing a great job. For example, if this king weren't there, right, maybe the black king would have hopes of blocking our pawn, but he can't do that. He's getting pushed back to the back rank. And I think in this position it was the h pawn that actually finished things off. So the e pawn is kind of supporting the bishop, and the h pawn is the one that is going to promote. Okay, although I have to say that white let it get very close, right? Yeah, white almost let black queen, but at the last moment they opened up their bishop to control that square, and if black takes the bishop, then white queens with a check. So yeah, black resigned because there is no defense to rook g8 and white promotes. Well, I would say, guys, it would be better not to get it so close, letting your opponent's pawn almost promote, but still, it was just a really nice demonstration of what a really active king looks like in the end game. So I hope you guys, when you play your games, you remember this really simple rule. It's not hard to start thinking about your king if you just know that that is one of the most distinguishing strategic ideas in the end game, and start thinking about where the king is going to be most effective, how it can be brought into the game. And obviously that doesn't mean not keeping him safe. It can still be risky for the king in the end game, but for the most part, the thought process should be shifting to how to make the king productive. And have fun using the king, guys.